I would pull them off. They're ready to be harvested. If you want to harvest them, you just take a little knife and put that down there and separate it from the base. The sooner you get these off, the more offsets you'll get. If you leave the original ones on, you'll probably only get the original 2 or 3, maybe 4. I have harvested and harvested as soon, I'll harvest really early, and I can get 16, 20, 25 plants off of one mother. Another thing that I do is I like to cut the foliage of the mother. Some people say, why do you do that? Well, I do that because it allows extra light to get to the base of the plant where these guys, the little babies, can see the sunlight and grow better. So it's a good little trick for getting them to get the light and be able to grow. Otherwise it's a little too dark and they grow a little slower. I also brought this to show you the seed. The thing about the genus Tillandsia, there's I think 3 characteristics that make it a Tillandsia. One, they have entire leaves, which are long skinny leaves. They have no thorns, which is nice, no spines on them, unlike the previous talk where you saw all the spines. The other, they have plumose seeds. And you can see as these seeds get picked up by the wind, they're going to fly. What did I say? They grow where it's really windy, right? And they can fly a long ways away to another granite, rock, limestone mountain, and they'll attach. They will attach to the bark of the tree that they're growing on. They'll attach to the telephone wires in Latin America. You'll see pictures of Tillandsias growing on telephone wires. This is the seed. The seed capsule has 3 chambers. And right at the end of the dry season, when it's the hottest, before the rains come, these seed capsules will desiccate, and that's when they rupture. And then the seeds blow and they attach, and then the rain starts, and it rains for 6 months. By the next time that the rain stops, you've got little seedlings that are already germinated and established enough to make it through that dry season. So I brought this in for you to see the seeds. They have 3 hairs, which work like a little propeller to propel them through the air. And then there's a little tiny brown thing, which is actually the seed itself. If you're growing from seed and hybridizing, one of the things you need to remember is it can take up to 2 years for the seed to be ready to harvest. So you're going to keep a little ugly old bloom spike around for a while until the seed's ready to harvest. This group is a group I would call mesic. Some people think that mesic means high elevation or cloud forest, and there's a lot of Tillandsias that do grow in the higher elevations up to 3,000 meters in Peru, where it's a cloud forest, and every day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the dense, thick fog comes in, and the plants are drenched and dripping wet till 10 in the morning. And then the sun comes out, they dry off a little bit, and then they get wet again. And it's quite cool. But this also happens at lower elevations in the humid wet forests. The same thing. They're either heavily rained, if you're near the equator, you're getting more constant rain. So those plants have evolved in a way where, not like the tectorums, the ones with the trichomes, they've kept their shiny, smooth leaves because they haven't needed to reflect the light to protect themselves. And they haven't needed to increase their surface area to gather moisture out of the atmosphere. So they basically have shiny glaucous leaves, thin. So that's your first clue that, okay, this plant needs a little more water than something that's thick, semi-succulent, and probably a little more shade. It's probably growing in a canopy where it's got more protection. It might even be in the lower part of the canopy. So these are all clues for you as to what and how to grow them. This is an interesting one, somnians, which makes pups on the inflorescence. It will also make basil pups. This is actually a pup here off of this plant, which is the original plant. So it makes both basil and pups on the inflorescence. These are certainly ready to pull off. If you pull them off, they will make some more. There's quite a few species that do pup on the inflorescence. There seems to be a higher predominance of that in the Latin American species, in South America, particularly Peru. There are a few species in Mexico and Central America that do it as well, but quite a few in Peru and Argentina that make offsets on inflorescence. And this doesn't need the bright sunlight. This is growing in shade, heavy shade, and it will still give the nice color. Again, that's its competition. In the dark, dense canopy where it's wet, it can turn color to attract the pollinators, so that's what it does. A couple more sort of mesic type species. This is not a high elevation plant, but again, it's got the soft green leaves, so you've got to remember that it's going to want more moisture than something with thick leaves. There's two forms of this. This is flavulata. This one has an orange spike. So does the other form, but it has red foliage, almost this color. And I pot those. You can grow those as well, mounted on cork or epiphytically because that's how they grow in nature. But a lot of these mesic plants that are growing epiphytically in nature, they're growing on the tree branch that is in a thick, dense, humid, moist forest where there's lots of debris that falls on that branch and collects at the base of the plant. So if you go collect those plants and you pull it off the tree, it's almost like you're pulling it out of a pot, because all the humus that's collected there is just like what you would be growing it in. And that provides it the moisture and nutrition for the roots to grow and establish its connection. They do want to be attached securely, and they grow a lot quicker if they have secure attachments than if they don't. This is a common Tillandsias species, which is in commercial production. I'm sure you've seen this. Again, these last in bloom for 3 months. They have beautiful color. And the old flowers tend to turn black, and you can pull those off as well. And it does have a little kind of clovey smell to it. And then finally, I have another mesic species. This is actually a hybrid, Tillandsias samantha. This is a hybrid that I made. I actually made the hybrid in 1987 or 89. I don't remember right now. And again, so I waited 2 years for the seed to be ripe. And then I spread those seeds, just like the hairs here, out and watched them grow slowly on shade cloth and keeping them moist and growing them up to size. And the first ones bloomed in about 2000. And out of those that bloomed, a selection was made and sent to a tissue culture production facility in Belgium, where it went into tissue culture production, and it is now commercially available, which is unusual for a Tillandsia. This is the old bloom spike. This was in bloom about a year ago, and it has a very hot pink, vibrant color to it, including these primary bracts are also a very strong pink color. But you've got the nice green foliage that recurves. It's very majestic looking. This got critical acclaim in 2012 when it was entered in the Chelsea Flower Garden Show, the Royal Horticultural Society Garden Show at Chelsea, and it was named one of the top 20 contenders for Plant of the Year, which is unusual for a bromeliad, let alone a Tillandsia, which most people sort of ignore. And then in January of last year, it was nominated, or actually November, December of 2012, the same year it won at Chelsea. It was nominated for the Glass Tulip Award. The Glass Tulip Award is an award that's given at the Flora Holland Floral Trade Center and Auction, which is the largest flower auction in the world. And they give something called the Glass Tulip Award in 5 categories every year, and this won for the houseplant category in January of 2013. So that's a quite prestigious award for a Tillandsia, winning 2 nominations in such a short period of time. So I'm a little proud about that. So let's see, I think we've covered all the different varieties. Again, there's the xerics, which reflect the light. You can usually tell they've got white foliage. You might be tricked sometimes because there are some high elevation Tillandsias that will have white foliage and lots of trichomes, but they don't like it hot, they like it cold. The intermediates will vary from the thick semi-succulent to the stiff foliage. They usually have blooms that last 12 to 18 months. That includes also the ones with unusual shapes with bulbous bases. And then there's the mesics. The mesics have less trichomes and they're green, and they need more moisture than the others. So let's see, the top 5 things that are important for growing Tillandsias. Number 1 would be air circulation. They need plenty of air circulation. They grow in canyons, they grow in the canopy, in the trees, and they get a lot of air. If you look up, usually the air is moving higher in the trees especially if you're a golfer. If you want to know how the wind is, you always look up. You watch the trees to see the movement. And in canyons, anytime there's a canyon, the wind whips through the canyon and there's plenty of air movement. Water, they like lots of water. They don't like to be misted, they like to be drenched. And when you water them, you want to water them good and get them wet so they last a couple of hours wet. If you do that, this time of year with the climate we're having now, you can get away with it once a week. Only when we had the 2% humidity, you probably needed to water every hour. Because when there's no humidity in the atmosphere, it was so dry, it just sucks all the moisture out of the plants. It will leave the plants and go into try to put more humidity into the atmosphere where your environment is. But our typical humidity that we have in Southern California is perfect for growing the Tillandsias because you can actually control how much water you give them without worrying about it being over humid or too wet or too moist. In the wintertime, you want to water a little bit less. The third thing, again, is air circulation. They really like plenty of air circulation. So you want to make sure that they've got lots of air movement wherever you put them. Fourth, let's talk about fertilizer. I tend to under-fertilize. In nature, they don't get a lot of nutrition. They'll get a little bit of nutrition from the humus that is around the foliage, around on the tree branches. They will get some of the nitrogen available through the atmosphere during the rainy season. I don't know if you know, but when the lightning strikes, it changes that nitrogen in the atmosphere to make it readily available for plants. So they get a lot of nitrogen during the thunderstorms. I tend to feed a weak dose of fertilizer, weak low portion of nitrogen. Some people who overfeed, that's fine, you can do that, but then you lose some of the beauty and shape of the plants. They get long and strappy. If they're supposed to be white, they'll turn green, or if you're using a fertilizer with a dye, like a blue or green dye, you'll really ruin something like this because these trichomes will grab right onto that dye, and you'll have a blue or green plant. And then the final thing, number 5, I would say, is plenty of air circulation. I guess I can't say that enough, but I think that the Tillandsias really benefit from air circulation. So, are there any questions?